Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Dritan Nesho, HarrisX founder and CEO. Dritan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
I want to timestamp where we are right now because obviously on election night, things can change on a dime. It's right after 11 p.m. on Tuesday night, and results are coming in. A picture is being painted, and it's being painted clearly and potentially even faster than we initially anticipated. So,
Mhm.
according to the Associated Press, Donald Trump has 214 electoral votes to Harris's 179. What are your thoughts on the state of the race right now?
Well, it looks like President Trump has the momentum, and in reality, he's leading in Georgia, he's leading in North Carolina. While I think that those races will close a little bit, in the final analysis, he'll still be ahead. And assuming that Arizona and Nevada come through for him, then all he needs is one state, whether it's Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania or a surprise like Virginia to win. And so Trump has more pathways to victory at this stage than Harris does. For Harris to win, she would need to pick up Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania all together, and then pull some kind of a surprise in the Sun Belt, maybe in Nevada or in Arizona. So it's so far so good. It's looking good for Trump, and frankly, he is overperforming his baseline in 2020 with several key groups, which, some of it the polling had picked up, but other elements of it, the polling did not pick up. And it's really because of the turnout that occurred the day of the election today in many of these different states.
The New York Times has Donald Trump's chance of winning at over 80%. You're saying he has more pathways to victory. So, as I said earlier, it's about 11 p.m. on the East Coast right now, and I'm sure plenty of us are deciding, do we have that extra cup of coffee? Do we have that extra Red Bull to stay up? I mean, what is the likely scenario to play out here according to the data, according to the numbers as they shake out?
Well, I think that the likely scenario is Trump picks up Wisconsin, where he has a slight lead and a slight advantage. Frankly, our own polling suggested that he was ahead by, close to a percentage point. Harris is likely to win in Pennsylvania, is likely to win in Michigan, although both of the states remain very competitive. And in a situation like that, as I mentioned, then Trump wins. I mean, just the math of the Electoral College is such that it's in his favor. Ultimately, younger voters under 30, even though they broke for Harris, they broke by a much smaller percentage than they did for Biden in 2020. So that's a surprise that wasn't necessarily picked up in the polling. African Americans voted for Trump, especially African American men, at a much higher incidence rate. And really, the big difference was Hispanic voters. I mean, Trump is hovering around 40% with Hispanic voters. That's slightly less of a great performance to what George W. Bush had in 2004 with his Hispanic voters, right? Which were a large driver of his reelection to the presidency. Bush was at around 45% or so. So he's doing well across the board. And for Harris, even though she's carrying women by double digits, and the gender gap in the vote is really striking. And exactly as we saw in the polling, Trump is ahead 8 or 9 points with men, and Harris is ahead 10 or 11 points with women. It's where that vote is coming from, or to put it better, not coming from, that matters. So really a democratic firewall in suburban areas that didn't materialize. And that's helping Trump, and it's helping his performance in several of these states, especially states like Pennsylvania, where, up until 20 minutes ago, Harris was up by three, and then now Trump is up by three. So it's kind of zigzagging as results are coming in from different parts of the state.
I guess my next question would be why did that Democrat firewall fail to materialize here now? Because these results aren't looking good for Harris, and Trump is up, or Michigan and Wisconsin, as of now, are leaning Republican.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's going to be plenty of time for the prognostics as to why what happens tonight happened. I think that one thing is increasingly clear. We're not going to have to wait long to call this race. And the expectation was that this race might drag for quite a bit of time. It might even turn into a year 2000 type scenario with a lot of recalls and a lot of tied results. And we're just not seeing that. As I said, Trump has the momentum so far, and he's capitalizing on it in a fairly convincing way at this stage.
The Democrats I've talked to were are surprised as these results are coming in. They were feeling fairly confident after that shock Iowa poll over the weekend. If you're the Harris campaign right now, what are you thinking?
Well, you'd rather be the Trump campaign right now than the Harris campaign. I mean, look, I think what they're thinking is how could they not have seen the underperformance, significant underperformance with younger voters under 30, in my opinion, right? Right now, Harris is winning younger voters under 30 by about 8 points. Biden won them by 21 points. And so even though Vice President Harris has run a credible campaign, a good campaign considering the circumstances, and no one can say anything otherwise, there are certain gaps in the Democratic strategy that are materializing right now that have not been corrected, at least with this early counting of the vote, that point to weaknesses. Usually the younger vote goes uh, Democratic. There's some kind of a revolt in that young vote that is breaking so strongly for Trump, and that needs to be analyzed. Certainly, Trump overperforming his previous record with Hispanics. That's something that needs to be analyzed. But even with African Americans, with Black voters, especially Black men, that's very important. So there is a little bit of a political realignment. If you're the Democrats, one thing is that's not panning out is the fact that voter groups are voting in the expected way that you would think based on their identity. They're not. They're actually breaking some of those expectations. And if you're in the Harris camp, then you're paying close attention to that, and certainly for the next go around. But I just want to reiterate, right? At this stage, we are at 11:11 p.m. Harris has several paths to victory. And if she starts gaining momentum in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, right there will be the sign or the telltale sign that she's resurgent. And so we'll know pretty quickly, right? It's these Rust Belt states, the way that they break, that will determine how the rest of the election is going. But right now, I think that Trump is doing just fine in Arizona. Nevada is going to be close regardless, but he can survive not winning Nevada. And so far, he has the momentum in this part of the race.
To your point, the race certainly is not called yet. She does have a few pathways to victory. So, as we wait into the rest of the night, the early hours of the morning, what specific counties and what specific swing states are you looking at to read the tea leaves to find out pretty quickly, hey, this is going Harris's way. Hey, this is going Trump's way.
Well, right now I'm looking very closely at Gwinnett County in Georgia. Last I checked, only about 55% of the vote had been reported, and this is a strong Democratic county. This can really make a difference in the tally in Georgia. And again, Trump is leading by about 2.5 percentage points right now. In a similar fashion, I would look at any county in the map, whether you're looking at the Wall Street Journal map or the New York Times map or any of the other maps, that is heavily braking in one direction, but you actually don't have a lot of the district vote counted yet. And so I think that there's so many of these counties that can be a telltale sign in each of the states. It's hard to go through one of them one by one by one. But by way of a formula, that's what I would recommend for the viewers at this stage.
So, Dritan, let's get inside your head a little bit. What are you thinking right now, election night, 11, probably 13 p.m.?
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on this race?
Well, I think that Trump closed very strong, and he closed the gap that Harris had created with the early vote to the point that his performance in the day of the election is actually slightly better than her advantage with the early vote. And in fact, that has to be the case because roughly a little bit less than half of the country voted early. As it was reported, about 40% of the 2020 vote voted early, either in person or by mail. And this election, while still being a high turnout election, is probably going to be just slightly less in terms of the turnout than what we saw in 2020. And so uh, Trump's strong performance the day of the election, the mobilization of his voters, them showing up is really what made the difference here. And it's something, that should be studied. Each of the parties has strengths in terms of their get out the vote operations. Democrats mobilize early and very effectively, and Republicans mobilize the day of the election. Both of the parties stand to benefit to move in each other's direction or in the other direction. And I think that that's really what made the big difference here. And this is why also a lot of the polling all the way up to the very end was so close and in so many cases was perhaps giving um, more benefit to Kamala Harris than it was to Trump. That's because you take a lot more risk the day of the election. Your voters might not actually turn up, but when they do turn up, you could actually neutralize an early advantage very effectively. And that seems to have been the case with Donald Trump right now.
You and I have been talking about the importance of those 7 battleground states for months now, and tonight on election night, all eyes continue to be on them. Pennsylvania has 19 electoral votes. Is that now still the most important all eyes on swing state, or is the picture, shifting a little bit? Are the other states equally as important? What does that look like?
Well, in our final pre-election poll, we basically said that it will be voters in Michigan, Wisconsin, and North Carolina that will determine the race, less so in Pennsylvania. And I still personally believe that Pennsylvania will go to Kamala Harris, and she'll probably win by over 1 percentage point there, maybe two. So it's more of a lean Democratic state amongst a battleground state than some of the other states that are closer. Um, our pre-election polling suggested that North Carolina was leaning towards Trump. That seems to be the case. He's up about 2 to 3 percentage points there right now. It suggested that he would win Georgia by about 3 percentage point. That seems to be the case as well. It suggested that he was up by 1% in Wisconsin. That seems to be the case right now. In fact, that's what the difference is, and it's holding. And so I hold to that view, for lack of a better sort of view, that I think this race won't be necessarily determined by Pennsylvania. Each of these campaigns have many different paths to victory, and it seems that Trump has checked up more boxes than Harris has across many of these, or more of these battleground states than she has. And so he's performing fairly strongly. I think the race will probably come down to Wisconsin in the final analysis, and that's why I believe it's a race that's going to be called in the next few hours rather than waiting into tomorrow or longer than that.
So you really think that this race could be called before we go to bed tonight?
I don't know if it's before most of your viewers go to bed, but it will certainly
But if you're
be
a political junkie, you
early tomorrow
tonight's your
morning.
Super Bowl, you're not falling asleep. You think that there's a good shot that this could be called 3 a.m., 4 or 4 a.m. Eastern
Yes,
time.
absolutely.
Okay, well, Dritan, this is good to know. I'm sure we will have you back on to discuss post result analysis. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you coming on and joining me.
Thanks for having me.